Let's make a life-size skull out of resin and a wedding bouquet. First, I had to get a custom mold created because there are no skulls this size on the market currently. But don't worry, this isn't the only one. Moldi resin molds will be offering this skull so that you can make your own. I always start my skull molds by curing a small resin layer first and then putting the flowers on the second layer so that they're not too smushed. Make sure you're using your heat gun to remove any bubbles out of every layer. Okay, so now that we have some resin in the mold, I also like to add resin to the flowers so that there aren't any air pockets when you put this in upside down. The skull has to be made entirely upside down, and this is just a little trick that I've learned over the years so that you don't have any large air pockets trapped in the rose petals when you demold it, because you're not going to see what it looks like until after it's complete. So you're going to fill the roses up and then slowly place them into the mold, kind of pushing them down into that resin layer. You're not going to want too thick of a resin layer because the flowers will want to float back up and you don't want them to lose their spot. So you're only going to do this on flowers that you're facing down towards the mold. You don't necessarily have to do that if you're doing any of them facing towards the sides. After I put in some of the main flowers, I go ahead and add all the little extra details, fill in those extra spaces with the filler flowers and greenery just to make sure that the skull is really full and doesn't have a lot of empty space in it. All right, I didn't record every layer of this because it took about 6 layers and it's pretty much just the same process over and over again. You pour resin, you heat gun the bubbles, you place the flowers until the skull is full. All right, the best part, when the final layer cures, you get to demold this bad boy. I already knew from experience with other irregular shaped molds that this one is going to be incredibly difficult to take out. So I immediately called in backup, gave up early, called my husband over to demold it. You see it has slits on the side. That was not it ripping. Those were purposely placed so that you can get it out. He had to put some leverage with his knee, put his whole weight into it, and it finally released. Oh, I forgot to mention that I did use warm soapy water down the sides of the mold to try to help it ease out better. But these molds are incredibly durable, so it received 0 ripping or damage or anything like that when he put his whole knee on it. But just look at it. I'm so obsessed. It came out so good. It can always be really nerve-wracking when you're doing something that you can't see the whole time. There were a couple spots around the teeth that were a little bit on the matte side, and I wanted to shine them back up because I wanted to be able to see the flowers that were behind them. And I used UV resin and just painted it on. I like the consistency of the UV resin. It's a little bit gummier, so it doesn't run down and cause drips as much. If you were working on a real smooth surface, I would probably use regular resin, but because this already had a texture, it was no problem using the UV. Then let that UV resin cook in the sun a little bit, but not too long. Overexposure to the sun is bad for your resin long term. Here's the final up-close shot of this bride's Until Death Do We Part themed bouquet preservation.